This will be the web intro that we will begin with. So when we think about the internet, I want you guys to understand a little bit about how a web browser actually accesses web pages before we jump in to this whole thing. So how do we actually access the web? So we use a web browser, obviously, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, whether that's on our computer or our tablet or mobile phone. One thing, especially when development for web development, is that we can't assume that everyone is using the same browser or even an up-to-date browser. So we can't assume that everyone has the latest web functionality. So when you are creating, you want to make sure that you test your whatever you're making website on Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. Also try to test it on multiple devices. So what does it look like on a mobile phone? What does it look like on a tablet that maybe hasn't had a browser update? Really be conscious of that when it comes to functionality. So the way hosting a website works is they are hosted on what's called a web server. This hosts a site. This is actually a special computer that's constantly connected to the internet, and it's optimized to send web pages out to people who request them. So for example, if you type www.wku.edu, that is actually hosted on our university server. And when you type that address, it connects and gives you that website. The internet is so fast now, you don't even realize that that's what's actually happening. Back in the days of slower internet, you might have experienced some longer load time for things. That's because the site actually has to be requested from the server. Popular server hosts that a lot of folks use with web development, unless they have their own server. Some companies have their own server, but if you're developing a portfolio site, you might be using GoDaddy or Bluehost or DreamHost. Those are some of the most affordable and popular servers and site hosts. Devices. So again, desktops, computers, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, and we're accessing the web via various screen sizes and varying connection speeds. Screen readers. Web accessibility is becoming even more important. Programs that read out the contents of a computer screen to a user. This is a screen reader. It's commonly used by people with visual impairments. Again, this is why it's important to include descriptions and captions of tags when you are creating websites, whether that is in the code or if you're using Squarespace or any other site creator and it asks you if you want to add a description for an image or whatever you have. You want to make sure that you are giving that textual content, because that textual content is what's going to potentially read the screen to someone who is visually impaired, and that's going to give them information about what is on the website. So how the web works, this is just a quick little screenshot from the textbook HTML and CSS by John Duckett. This is also the book that I will be working out of this semester a little bit for some of these things we'll be talking about. You're not required to have that book, but it is a super awesome resource and it's beautifully designed. So again, when you visit the web server hosting that site, could be anywhere in the world. In order for you to find the location of the web server, your browser will first connect to the domain name system server, and then it bounces until it gives you your website. So what exactly is HTML? So this is when we begin our code conversation and we talk about how that functions and what that is. So HTML, hypertext, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. You guys, we're going to dive in a little deeper in this, so you need to know that these initials that we're going to be talking about stand for things. And HTML's function, it describes the structure of the web page. Okay, that's all it does. It tells us what is on the page, what is a header, what is a paragraph, and what structure it is in. So understanding the structure of an HTML element. So when you write code, these little guys here within the brackets, that is called an element. So Anything within the angled brackets is an element. So typically with HTML, you will see two sets of elements. You will see an opening tag and a closing tag. But basically what you want to understand is whatever you are telling this web structure is to be, that will change depending on what is between these elements here. Okay, so this is creating an H1 header here, so I'm creating a bolder, larger header. We'll jump into that a little bit more later, but I want you guys to understand that this is telling the website, when it's reading this code on the back end, this is telling this something about the structure of the site. So here we go. Elements. So elements are made up of two tags, your opening tag and your closing tag. So this is what we were just chatting about. H1. So essentially your opening tag is always going to be on the left, your closing tag is always going to be on the right. And the way to denote those is that you have the / for your closing tag. So whatever you're working with to code, if you're using just like a Word document to code, it's not going to do this. But if you're using something that's smart enough to know what comes next in your code, it will usually go ahead. If you type H1, it's going to go ahead and add a closing tag for you. So with code, it's very important that you have all of the ingredients. Okay, you have to have everything together or it won't work. So if this / was missing in my code, whatever is in between here would not be formatted correctly. Okay, so elements are made up of two tags, opening, closing tag, and you have to have both. Okay, so each HTML element tells the browser something about the information, not informal, sorry, about the information that sits between the tags. So here again, let's take a look, break this down a little bit more. Again, we have in our opening tag, we'll have the left angle bracket, the right angle bracket, and we will have the character in the middle. Okay, same thing in the closing tag, brackets, / because that's a closing tag, and then our character. So these things that are in between your brackets are always going to coincide. So if this was a P, this would also be a P. Oops, sorry guys. So the characters in between the brackets indicate the tag's purpose. Okay, so this tells you what you are doing to the text that's going to sit in between here in your code. So again, understanding structure, when you are writing a web page, and again, depending on what you're writing in, some of this default might be there for you. A lot of folks don't really use Dreamweaver anymore, but if you're using Dreamweaver, well, if you open an HTML document, it will automatically start with the open and closing tag. Okay, so if you're writing a basic web page in HTML, you will have the opening HTML tag, and that indicates that any content between here, this is going to be visual. Okay, anything that is in the HTML area will be visual and help you create the structure in your site. And then you will have the closing tag. The closing tag indicates that it is the end of the code. So essentially your opening tag and your closing tags are your stop and your go. Okay, it's the easiest way to think about it. And then you have, so this, we're just building our structure, and again, we're going to demo this hands-on in class after you view this lesson. So your next class after you view this lesson, we will put this into action. So, you know, kind of percolate on it and get it in your brain, and then when you come to class, we will physically get our hands in this and mess around with it, okay? Your body tag. So this indicates anything between it. This is actually going to, sorry, I misspoke earlier. HTML, there might be non-visual information about your HTML document in your orange area, but anything within the green area, this is going to be your main browser content and your visual content. So anything in your body area, we will see, okay? And again, the closing tag indicates that this is the end of what the viewers will see. All right, so we have, for example, if we're creating just a basic page, maybe something that says about in the main header, and then we're going to have some paragraph text, right? So this is a main heading. We'll talk a little more about your H1 level headings, but we have our opening tag, our closing tag, and our text in the middle. So the text in the middle of these brackets, so if we are typing, if we're coding this, this is the text that we're going to see. And this will also show up as a bolder header. Paragraph text. Paragraph text is always going to be marked with a P. That's a fairly easy one. Paragraph text is just going to be standard, basic text that's in your web page. And then we might have, for example, a subheading. So a heading that's a little smaller, a little bolder, helping create that structure, create that hierarchy. And then we might have some more paragraph text. Okay. So it says, let's try it. We will do the hands-on demo in class. So we're going to skip over that part. But I do want to continue talking a little bit more about HTML elements. So elements can have, and this is something again that I don't expect you to commit all of this to memory, because there's plenty of cheat sheets and code, like charts for HTML code. So if you forget something, you can always look it up. If you need a specific attribute or an element, you don't have to commit everything to memory. I would get used to the image element, which we'll chat about later, the heading element, and the paragraph, because those are like the main big things you're going to be using initially. All right, so attributes tell us more about elements that are found in the opening tag. So you might see, for example, if you download a template, you might see this type of information. So the attribute tells you that there's more information about the element itself. Okay, so we have the attribute name. So for example, here we have language. This indicates what kind of extra information you're supplying about the element. And we have the equals, and we have the value. So that's the information or setting for the attribute. So whatever attribute you're applying, you'll always have an attribute name, which is what you're doing, and then you'll have the value, which is the setting or information about what this attribute is doing or modifying. Okay. Content management system. So these are the things that you guys will most likely be creating content with if you're using Webflow, if you're using WordPress. WordPress is like one of the most popular content management systems. Squarespace doesn't really refer to itself as a content management system, but it is doing all the code for you on the background and allowing you to manage and build your content from the front end. So it does perform similarly to a content management system, but it is not necessarily that. Okay. So content management system allows you to build sites with themes or templates and allows for basic code modification for both HTML and CSS. So here, this is a little bit of an older screenshot, but this is an example of a WordPress blog post. So here, if we wanted to go in and edit the code, you'll see here I've got my H2 header. I've got my text that will be in. I actually have the Ahref. We haven't talked about that yet, but that indicates that we're pulling an image from somewhere. And then we have just text here. That's going to be our basic paragraph text. So again, WordPress, depending on what plugins you're using with WordPress, that will allow you more capability to edit your HTML and your CSS. To a certain extent, Squarespace will let you edit the CSS just a tad, but that gets a little dicey. You have to really, really know what you're doing to edit the CSS in that. But this is just an example of a content management system. Understanding source code, again, this is a demo. We will do that demo in class when you return to class. All right, so just a summary of what we've talked about in this first little part of this. HTML pages, they're just text documents. HTML uses tags, which are characters that sit inside those angled brackets, and they contain information. Tags are often referred to as elements, and tags usually come in pairs, an opening tag and a closing tag. And opening tags can carry attributes, which tell us more about the content of that element. So that's where we were changing or indicating that the language was in English. That example was an attribute. And attributes require a name and a value. For example, language, English. And to learn HTML, you need to know what tags are, what they do, and where they go in the code. Okay, so that is the first thing that we will chat about here. That is just kind of introduction to how the web works and planting the seed for talking more about HTML. So in the next few videos, we'll expand specifically on HTML itself.